So this is just before 2010 hours GMT on Wednesday, 15th of June 2022. This is the fourth part of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast only on the internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial, and not on cable networks platforms. And this is being done on the theme of justice for BabyAngel Geronimo. BabyAngel Geronimo editions of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel. I am Muhammad Haque, editor and presenter and creator of this channel and the campaign that goes with this channel and other activities and events and programs and projects. Now, in the third part of today's KhoodeelaarTV television editions, Justice for BabyAngel Geronimo, I began to talk about the London borough of Lambeth, and that was in the context of the intensive and extensive and widespread corruption in the Labour Party controlled councils, and Lambeth has been more often controlled by the Labour Party than by any other, quote, political party. And the Lambeth Borough Council was in the news more frequently during the 1980s, let's say following the 1981 election of the Labour Party to the Greater London Council in May 1981 than Lambeth had been at any other times. And the reason was there was a coincidence. There was a Lambeth councillor, Labour councillor called Ted Knight, who was reported by the Fleet Street tabloids like The Sun, the Daily Mail, and the other racist right-wing reactionary newspapers in Fleet Street, along with the Daily Mail and the Daily Scum, controlled by Rupert Murdoch. The Ted Knight was a close ally of Ken lying still Livingston. Now, they don't say he's lying still. They never say he is lying at all. The lying still is the phrase that I created about Ken lying still Livingston. I created that on the evidence of his behavior, lying behavior. And I did not start using it until during the height of the Khoodeelaar campaign to stop the crossrail hole being dug in Brick Lane, through Brick Lane, during the first decade of this century. Ken lying still Livingston, the expression Ken lying still Livingston instantly caught on with all the actual acute observers of the behavior of Ken lying still Livingston. So it was one of those phrases that I created and I have created that caught on, and it's actually caught on. Now, Ken lying still Livingston in the 1980s had just staged a coup. I've said it dozens of times, if not more often, more numbers of times. He had staged a coup to unseat Andrew McIntosh. Andrew McIntosh was the Labour Party GLC councillor who led the Labour Party's election in May 1981 to the GLC. And he successfully defeated Andrew McIntosh, the Horace Cutler fronted Conservative control of the Greater London Council. So when Ken lying still Livingston saw the huge number of GLC members, Labour Party members, elected in May 1981. He and a number of others, including Breen Davies, who since has relocated to Australia, I think, they conspired, and within 24 hours of the election of May 1981, Ken Langston Livingstone and his cohorts and colluders overthrew Andrew McIntosh from the position of leader of the Labour group and effectively the position of the leader of the Greater London Council. So Ken Langston Livingstone and Ted Knight had been colleagues, quote, comrades, because they became councillors for the same councils for several years. And apart from that, they were also belonged to the so-called ultra-left. Now, my experience of studying face-to-face on the ground, studying the behavior of the so-called varieties of the left in the British political scene over the last, let's say, 6 decades. And before I arrived in London, my studies on the published evidence, they confirm that there is no such thing as the British left, or there is no such thing as left in British politics. That is to say, there is no socialism in British political scene. So anyone who says that they are left of this, left of that, or quarter left, or half left, or three quarters left, or ultra left, or who is decried and denounced as being ultra left by the likes of the Daily Mail and the Sun, the Daily Telegraph, and others. These are bogus descriptions that are misleading, because during the last, coming up to 8 decades since the end of the so-called World War, that is 1945, all varieties of left-wing kind of pretentious movements and careers and platforms have been exposed as being facile and of no real substance whatsoever. And the test for me of whether a particular claimant or pretender to left politics or socialist politics is genuine is to see if they're, before that, they're actively against racism. When there is no anti-racist left politics or politicians among the white politicals in Britain. I mean, one man who died in 2004 and is being referred to by Private Lie as the revered investigative journalist, Paul Foot. I knew him by participation in various campaigns, especially the campaigns in the 1970s against the Labour Home Secretary Marlene Rees's attempts to deport the New York-based journalist called Mark Hosenball and his co-American ex-CIA man called Philip A.G. In that campaign, I also met, as strictly as campaigners, not personally, not socially, Jonathan Aitken, who is a descendant of Beaverbrook of the Daily Express group. Now, these people, Paul Foot et al., spewed all kinds of radical sounding slogans against Marlene Rees and against the deportation plan by the Marlene Rees fronted Home Office in the James Callaghan regime in the UK. But they were racists, and Paul Foot was the most racist one because I was walking. I walked a lot in Fleet Street, not Fleet Street newspaper, the Fleet Street itself. And one day I was walking towards the Strand, where the High Court and the courts are based. And Paul Foot was walking from the opposite direction. Now, I, of course, recognized him and I said hello and I stopped to exchange basic courtesies. And Paul Foot said he didn't know who I was. Now, there is no way that he could not know who I was or that I had met him and he had met me on dozens of occasions. So the fact that he did that was in order to shield himself, as racists do, from publicly acknowledging somebody who was not of the same skin color as he himself was. That's what happens. And Fleet Street has been the scene of so many racists and liars who have actually refused to recognize me, acknowledge me. Not that I depended on their acknowledgement or recognition whatsoever, but this is just a commentary on the state of racist brainwashing and backwardness and dishonesty on the part of these people referred to as revered Paul Foot. And the Paul Foot Award, which the Private Lie has been running along with The Guardian, is of course reserved mainly for racist court journalists. Now, when Ken Livingston and Ted Knight were in power, Ted Knight was in power as leader of the Lambeth Council, and Ken Livingston was the coup leader who had become the leader of the GLC. So both of them had particular access to the resources of the Lambeth Council and the Greater London Council, respectively. And they were also at the same time listed as being friends with the regime fronted by Muammar Gaddafi in Libya at the time. So I used to go to County Hall every single day, as I've said before. During the 1980s, starting from 1981, after the end of the GLC, after the end of the Inner London Education Authority during that decade, I visited County Hall more often than I visited any other institutional building or structure in London. And I did that in order to observe the evidence and collect the evidence of the behavior of the Greater London Council. Because at the time that Ken Livingston was in post, he was issuing narcissistic statements through the media, claiming all kinds of achievements and all kinds of novelties and all kinds of policies that were supposedly radical policies in British politics. There were nothing of the sort, because that is what I'll come to in a minute. So at the same time, and also I was involved in the campaign against the Crossrail plot against Brick Lane. So, and Livingston was a prime kind of abuser of his position and was a supporter of the Crossrail plot against Brick Lane. So for that reason, I visited County Hall more frequently than I would have done. The main reason why I visited County Hall, Southeast one, which is opposite, almost opposite the Palace of Westminster on the other side of the River Thames. The Palace of Westminster is on the northern side, or northern bank, and the county hall is on the southern bank, eastern bank, southern bank, whatever. And in the course of my visits to the county hall, one of the main regular things that I did was to challenge Ken Lyons to Livingstone about his narcissistic lying propaganda initiatives. Now remember, Ken Lyons Livingstone was being feted by most of the broadcasting media as a world-class kind of radical socialist. And Ken Lyons Livingstone reciprocated the broadcast media's felicitations of him, promotions of him, as compared to Ken Lyons Livingstone condemnations of the Fleet Street newspapers. I mean, although he didn't name all the Fleet Street newspapers, he was actually focusing on the role of the Daily Mail and the Murdoch scum. So therefore, he was more content and pleased with the role being played by the broadcast media, ITV, the BBC, and even Sky News. To the extent that Sky News was there, Sky News was only just beginning, I think. But it's ITV and the BBC that he was grateful for, and he was kind of accommodating to. Now, at that same time, they both Livingstone and Ted Knight spread the word among the people who visited County Hall. And the people who visited County Hall included quite a significant number of people of African and Asian backgrounds. In terms of the countries of origins, I don't know who came from what country, but they came from African backgrounds, Caribbean backgrounds, and Asian backgrounds. The only person that I knew the origin of was somebody called Prabhu Guptara. Prabhu Guptara came from India, Indian background. Apart from that, I didn't know the kind of origins of those people, other people, in terms of affiliation with country or state. And another one was, from a Caribbean country who is since passed away. I think he's passed away about last 2 or 3 years ago, passed away in the USA. And he was among the people that used to visit County Hall. Not as frequently as I did, but he did. And what happened, Ken Lyons Livingstone spread the word among these people, suspecting or expecting them to swallow the pill of propaganda based on the fact that these people he was focusing on or targeting were mainly from the Caribbean and the Asian subcontinents. Asian subcontinent meaning India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. He didn't, of course, mean me, but others. And their target was to hold the carrot in front of them and saying that Ken Lyons Livingstone had organized a trip or trips to Gaddafi's Libya, and all the expenses would be paid for anyone who would want to go there. I heard later that some people did go there, but I never got involved in the enlisting or the discussions about anything to do with going there. As a principal, all my career, all my life, I have refused to take part in these kind of things, wherever I have been. I don't take bananas, I don't take carrots, and I don't take bribes. And I most certainly wasn't impressed by Gaddafi. Not because I had anything against him, but I didn't find that he was running a democratic kind of revolution. And I didn't think that he was being fair to many of the critics and many of the people opposing his regime. But in any case, regardless of what position I took, I would never go there. I was offered in the 1970s one or two opportunities to go to an African country to do some politics. I said, absolutely no way. My politics is not for other people to organize. My politics is for me to organize, which is politics based on ethics and morality. And so, therefore, I didn't go there, and I was offered similar positions. Well, I was offered positions in various governments, and I said no, on the same principle. Now, when Gaddafi was visited by these people, I think that was a time which coincided with the Workers' Revolutionary Party, I think WRP, I think, which Vanessa Redgrave and her quote comrades belonged to. And the WRP was given enough money by Gaddafi to buy brand new, latest, state of the art printing machines to publish the news line. I mean, all of this was happening according to later disclosures about the same time as Gary Healy or Jerry Healy was sexually exploiting so many nubile women belonging to the WRP and so on. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Lambeth Council corruption. So when I became aware of the goings on in Lambeth by my presence in the county hall. Remember, my county hall trips, daily trips, regular trips to county hall began starting in May 1981 and continued until the last years of the decade, 1980s, when the Inner London Education Authority was disbanded completely. And I had been a member of the most bureaucratically, in terms of decision making, powerful part of the Inner London Education Authority, the Education Committee. So, in addition to my compulsion, moral compulsion to challenge Ken Livingstone's lying, I had a functional, evidential reason for attending the county hall because of my involvement as a member of the disbanded. I cannot recall at this minute because the notes are not to hand. But so essentially, when I was in county hall, I would spend my time as a lobby correspondent, that is to say, going to the parts where the various staff, journalists belonging to the Fleet Street paper spend their time. And I found that Ted Knight was doing a great deal of damage to the people of Lambeth. Not that the people who were sources of the information were concerned for the welfare of the people of Lambeth. But my interpretation of what Ted Knight was doing was that he was messing up the people of Lambeth. So I was regularly in receipt of various kinds of updates. And when by accident I came across an opportunity to see if I could get indirectly involved in the behavior of the Lambeth Council. That happened in February 1984. I considered that, and after a significant consideration, I became increasingly involved in the spending of my time, my energy, and the offering of my knowledge and my insights in 1986. But during the period of the 1986 to 1980 regime, the election was held in 1986, I think. I found that I was spending more time in trying to get across to whoever it was that I needed to get across to the ideas and the policies and the objections and objections to the behavior of the Lambeth Council, because Ted Knight was no longer there. It was Linda Bellows. And the regime that Linda Bellows fronted was completely and absolutely as corrupt as any. But the veneer she was using was the lesbian politics that she belonged to. There was no, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere in the proceedings, in the records of the Lambeth Council during Linda Bellows's time, that she was bothered about the people of Lambeth, that she was bothered about poverty, that she was bothered about hunger, that she was bothered about really bothered about racism and either institutional or individual. So, without going into chapter and verse of every single time, my summary at this point is that Lambeth Council, although it wasn't lumbered with an executive mayor, because that is the context in which I started talking about the corruption of Lambeth Council, because to the southwest of Lambeth is the Croydon Borough Council, which, after being put through complete, absolute, utter corruption by the Labour Party, has been pushed into further corruption by the Lib Dems. And I will tell you just how corrupt the various factions in the parties or various parties in the local government scenes, how corrupt they are and how completely unfit for purpose they are, and how undemocratic they are. And I shall show that the fact that none of this corruption is actually reported, even by the Guardian, let alone by this scum or the Daily Mirror, shows that there is a disconnect. There is an ongoing disconnect between the so-called media, democratic media, and the rights and needs of the people in a so-called democracy where the people are suppressed, being really denied their rights. This week's boast by the Observer and the Guardian that one of their freelance writers, Carol Cordwalla, whatever the pronunciation, she says that that is a Welsh name. I cannot examine the nomenclature, the Welsh nomenclature, but let's say the woman Carol Cordwalla, who was sued for defamation by Aaron Banks, the man who funded Leave.eu campaign to the tune of £8 million. He sued Carol Cordwalla personally, not the Guardian or the Observer. But he strategically chose to sue her, to isolate her, so that she won't be able to defend herself. And the basic ground, or the evidence on which evidence of so-called defamation that he used against Carol Cordwalla, was the allegation or the statement or the assertion that she published several times that he, Aaron Banks, was close to the Russian state. That was the allegation. She didn't make the allegation as extensively about any links with Vladimir Putin personally, but it amounted to the same thing. In any case, the outcome of the 3 year long defamation action that Aaron Banks brought against Carol Cordwalla is that Aaron Banks failed, and the ground on which Justice Mrs. Stein found him as having failed is the public interest justification. Mrs. Justice Stein said in her ruling that I haven't yet checked the full contents of, but the headline issue is that she found that Carol Cordwalla had successfully established the justification for claiming that Aaron Banks was close to the Russian state on the ground that it was an issue, it was a matter of sufficient public interest. That is, of course, a defense in defamation law. I hasten to say that that is not going to be available to a defendant who is sued personally, because this is a defense available to a journalist. And this was the defamation action brought against a journalist. Most individuals who are sued individually for defamation are not able to seek that as a defense. We shall come to the other details of defamation actions and defamation laws in due course. Going back to Lambeth Council, I attended several events in Lambeth Council, or I attended several events held within the premises owned by the Lambeth Council, including various council meetings that I attended from the public gallery for sheer evidence. And the other things that I did was attended various seminars and discussions, most of which I had organized for the purpose of politically educating parents and guardians of children in schools. And I found, and I have found since, because that all of this was happening in the 1980s. So 80s, 90s, 2010, 2020, the 30 plus years, so 3 decades, 4th decade on. No other similar program has taken place anywhere. It's not just Lambeth Council, but I organized events in all 10 boroughs that together made up the Inner London Education Authority, and with the sole purpose of educating the parents and the guardians. And I found that although the organizing of the events personally took a toll on me, and it cost me a great deal. When I say cost, I compare the cost. If I hadn't done any of those things in those years, and if I had done the writing that I did in return for money or to sell my writing, based on the results, based on the impact and the effect, the results, not on the negotiation, but based on the results for the community, I could charge more than David Pennick charged the Manchester City Football Club when he took a retainer from them to represent them in their appeal against a European football regulators' decision ruling against them. David Pennick charged £20,000 a day. And not just David Pennick, nobody that I know can write as many words of substance in as many hours as I can do, and I have done, for decades. So I could charge on a daily basis based on David Pennick's rate, £40,000 a day. Now, 2 days' earnings would have been enough to buy me a sufficient part of a freehold ownership of a flat or a place, on which more and more and more, much later, not necessarily in this edition, but in future editions, Andy Warhol's graphics on Marilyn Monroe has sold probably for $150 million or $140 million if my recollection is confused with the sterling rate. So let's say $140 million. Andy Warhol's kind of illustration of Marilyn Monroe, one page, one illustration. So you multiply that with my original work, poetry, original poems, and other literary creations, and you can see that hundreds of millions of pounds equivalents, because I can charge that. It's all world exclusive, unique, and so on. So when I tell somebody that my work is worth billions, that is what I mean. Work of less worth, much less worth than my work would be, have been fetching hundreds of millions. So going back to Lambeth Council, when I was speaking about the various aspects of council corruption and bureaucracy, in one speech I referred to, remember that was 1980s when it wasn't fashionable. It wasn't fashionable to talk about black, that is African, mainly African origin sports people. I made the fundamentally original statement saying that they were the leaders, that the African sportsmen or African origin sportsmen, whether they're born in the UK or born in the Caribbean or born in areas outside of Africa, geographically, African origin remains unalterable. So that they were actually leading as role models and leaders. And to this day, despite the fact that the likes of mental slaves, highly positioned mental slaves like Harman Ousley, have done a big number of trade by calling themselves against football racism, nobody has said a fraction of the original statement of the diagnosis that I said in the 1980s in that speech that I made to Lambeth Council based or Lambeth Council premises based gathering. So you extrapolate that, and I have made similar statements and speeches. Although I did make the speeches elsewhere, but in the case of Lambeth, my speeches were heard, and to my observation, they were approved and appreciated. But that's it. Nobody followed up. So Lambeth is back in the doldrums and in the corruption atmosphere as it had been before I intervened or I tried to intervene. And the fact that Lambeth Council is rated in the public search kind of estimates as being one of the most complained against local councils in London. Proves the point. So what I'll do, this is 40 minutes plus. I'll bring an end to this particular edition. And next we shall go to the London Borough of Newham, whenever the next edition is. And we shall then go to Tower Hamlets, and then we shall go to Lewisham. And then we shall talk about the regime fronted by Sadiq Khan as the incumbent post holder in the name of London. So we'll be talking about the absurdity and the corruption and criminality associated with the executive mayor post, no matter whether it's local borough level or whether it's London wide. And we shall take all of this to the point of the news during today that Keir Starmer has pleaded with his so-called colleagues on the shadow cabinet to stop calling him boring or calling his leadership boring. We haven't called him boring at all. We think it's a completely ineffectual, useless word, boring. We have called him on the facts the man who politically murdered the Labour Party. And we shall stick to that. And we shall do that in the course of the coming programs. Now, as it is the theme, justice for BabyAngel Geronimo, we end with this updated version of the justice for BabyAngel Geronimo. Keir Starmer supported Boris Johnson's endorsement of the propaganda, the demonizing propaganda, the hurtful propaganda, the criminal, absolute, untruthful propaganda operated by the UK Central Government Department, the depraved DEFRA, against the most innocent BabyAngel Geronimo. And a number of Fleet Street people, including the so-called anti-Fleet Street private lie editor Ian Pissoff, have made cruel remarks about BabyAngel Geronimo, have made cruel and mocking remarks about the people who support BabyAngel Geronimo. Now, BabyAngel Geronimo is a symbol, a personality like no other, and BabyAngel Geronimo is the teacher, most innocent BabyAngel Geronimo in the whole world. And the magnitude, the magnanimity that has been displayed by BabyAngel Geronimo in the face of depravity and corruption and criminality fronted by Boris Johnson, these are going to outlive all the detractors and all the criminals, including the liar Boris Johnson, including the political murderer of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, including the cruelty and depravity personification, Weasel Wes Streeting. All of them are listed as having endorsed the attacks mounted against the BabyAngel Geronimo. BabyAngel Geronimo is the one who cannot, in human terms, cannot speak. But being silent has not stopped BabyAngel Geronimo from being more able to, more articulate than the people who can speak and who are articulate in speaking for justice and speaking for truth and tolerance and fairness and love. The love as being recognition of the other one and the extension of support, pure support and protection and service and appreciation for them. Baby Angel Geronimo deserves all of that. And Baby Angel Geronimo has not been given any of that by the depraved attackers. And Baby Angel Geronimo is still there, witnessing the daily unfurling, unraveling of the various levels of unraveling of the criminals, Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, Weasel, West Streeting, and others of their disgraceful, depraved ilk. So Baby Angel Geronimo is, in our view, destined to remain a universal icon, transcending time and transcending regions and transcending the careerist depravity of criminals like Johnson, criminals like George Eustace, injustice, criminals like the DEFRA, depraved chief vet, Christian Middlemess, and other criminals. So we shall be updating on the universal, pacific, undeniable, truthful witness by the Baby Angel Geronimo, the personification of peace, justice, and tolerance, of the depravity of Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, and others in the course of the coming programs and editions. So this would be like, what is the time now? It's coming to about 5 minutes to 5 minutes to the hour, which is the 10 hours GMT. And we shall be returning whenever all the factors involved in the broadcast are suitable and are available. Wherever you are watching, please think about the contents of what we have broadcast, and do not be deterred by the fact that we have policy of not wanting to carry lots of friends and lots of followers. If you come across this by accident, fine, you are welcome. Think about the contents. Don't think about the numbers that follow us. So we shall say goodbye at this stage. Until the next edition.